Scientists. What's the most terrifying natural phenomena? Story 1. The sailing stones in Death Valley are one of those things that look straight up paranormal when you first see them, because you've got these heavy rocks just sitting in the desert, with long trails behind them like they casually decided to go for a walk. No people, no animals dragging them, no obvious force, just rocks that have clearly moved across flat, dry ground. For decades, nobody could fully explain it. People threw out all kinds of ideas: magnetism, aliens, vibrations, weird desert winds, you name it, because some of these stones weigh dozens of kilos, and their tracks stretch for meters, sometimes even changing direction. The creepy part is that nobody ever actually saw them move for a long time. They just changed position over time. Turns out the real explanation is still kind of eerie, just less supernatural. Under very specific conditions, a thin layer of water forms on the desert floor after rain, then freezes overnight into a fragile sheet of ice. As the sun comes up, the ice starts breaking into large floating panels. Wind pushes those panels slowly across the slick mud, and if a rock is embedded in the ice, it gets dragged along, leaving that signature trail behind it. The movement is incredibly slow, like centimeters per second, so it's basically invisible unless you're watching at the exact right time. Scientists finally confirmed it by setting up GPS trackers and cameras and actually catching the stones in motion. So, no, the rocks aren't alive. But the unsettling part is that for years, massive stones were literally moving across a barren landscape in silence, leaving trails behind them, and nobody had ever witnessed it happening. It's one of those reminders that nature can look supernatural when you're missing just one piece of the puzzle. Story 2. The Bolton Strid looks almost harmless at first glance, which is exactly what makes it so terrifying. It's basically a narrow section of the river wharf, where the water suddenly compresses into a tight channel. On the surface, it can look like a small stream you could step across, especially compared to the wider, calmer river just upstream. People see it and think, that doesn't look so bad. That's the trap. Underneath that narrow surface is a powerful, fast-moving flow forced through jagged rock formations. The water isn't just moving forward, it's churning vertically, plunging into deep underwater channels, cracks, and caverns carved into the stone over time. So if someone falls in, they don't just get carried downstream, they get pulled under. The currents can force a person deep into submerged rock structures, where getting out becomes nearly impossible. Even strong swimmers don't stand a chance because it's not about swimming ability. It's about being dragged into an environment that acts more like a natural hydraulic trap. What makes it worse is how deceptive it is. It doesn't roar like a massive waterfall or look obviously deadly. It's quiet, narrow, and almost inviting in the wrong conditions. That mismatch between appearance and danger is what gives it such a dark reputation. There's a long-standing claim that no one who has fallen fully into the Strid has survived, though like many historical claims, exact records are hard to verify. Still, multiple fatalities and rescues over time have reinforced how dangerous it is. It's basically a perfect example of a natural phenomenon that doesn't look like a threat until it's far too late. A calm-looking stretch of water, hiding something that behaves more like a submerged machine designed to pull things down and keep them there. Story 3. Spotted Lake looks like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, especially in the summer when the water partially evaporates and what's left behind are these eerie, perfectly defined circular spots scattered across the lake bed. At first glance, it doesn't even look real. It's like someone spilled a bunch of giant paint dots across the ground. each one a different color: yellow, green, blue, white, depending on the mineral concentration. What's actually happening is that the lake is insanely rich in dissolved minerals like magnesium sulfate, calcium, sodium, and other salts. During hotter months, the water evaporates, and those minerals start to crystallize and separate out into individual pools. Each spot forms its own little microenvironment with slightly different chemistry, which is why they end up different colors. So visually, it's stunning, but there's also something slightly unsettling about it. The surface can look solid in places, but isn't necessarily stable. And the chemistry of the water is extreme enough that it's not somewhere you'd casually want to wade into. It's not deadly like a boiling acid lake or anything, but it's definitely not your average lake either. What adds another layer to it is that the lake has been culturally significant for a long time. Local indigenous communities have regarded it as a place with unique properties, and historically it was even used for mineral extraction during wartime. The terrifying part isn't that it's going to suddenly kill you, it's more that it feels alien. It breaks your expectations of what a lake should look like, and that alone makes it unsettling. It's one of those places where nature looks like it's glitching. Story 4. Bloodfalls spilling out of Taylor Glacier looks like something straight out of a horror movie because you've got this massive wall of ice, and then a deep red liquid pouring out of it like the glacier itself is bleeding. The first time explorers saw it, it genuinely freaked people out. At a glance, it looks like blood, but what's actually happening is still pretty insane. Beneath the glacier is a pocket of ancient, super salty water that's been trapped for potentially millions of years. It's completely cut off from sunlight and oxygen, basically an isolated ecosystem under a frozen desert. That water is loaded with iron. When it finally seeps out through cracks in the glacier and hits the air, the iron reacts with oxygen and oxidizes, basically rusting instantly, which gives it that dark red blood-like color. So the bleeding glacier is actually a chemical reaction happening in real time. But the part that makes it genuinely creepy is what's living down there. Scientists have found microbes surviving in that sealed, oxygen-poor environment, using chemical reactions instead of sunlight to stay alive. No light, no fresh air, freezing temperatures, and they're still functioning. It's basically life in conditions that feel closer to another planet than Earth. So, you've got a glacier that leaks red fluid from a hidden ancient reservoir filled with organisms surviving in total isolation, under conditions that shouldn't really support life the way we expect. It's not dangerous in the obvious sense, but it hits that deep, this shouldn't exist feeling. Like Earth casually reminding you it has environments that feel completely alien, and we're just living on the surface. Story 5. Darvaza Gas Crater, better known as the Gates of Hell, is one of those places that looks so unreal it almost feels staged, except it's been burning continuously for decades in the middle of a desert. It started back in 1971 when Soviet geologists were drilling in the Karakum Desert and accidentally hit a pocket of natural gas. The ground collapsed, creating a large crater, and to prevent the gas from spreading and potentially causing harm, they decided to set it on fire, assuming it would burn off in a few days. It never stopped. Instead, the crater just kept burning, and it still burns today. You've got this massive pit, dozens of meters across, filled with hundreds of small fires constantly flickering and roaring, especially at night when the whole thing glows like an open furnace in the ground. Standing near it, you can feel the heat, hear the gas hissing, and flames moving, and smell the constant burn. It's not just visually intense, It feels alive in a weird way, like the earth has a wound that won't close. The terrifying part isn't just the fire, it's the scale and persistence. This isn't a volcanic eruption or a short-lived event. It's a human-triggered phenomenon that just keeps going, fueled by something deep underground we don't fully control. It's also a reminder of how unpredictable interactions with natural systems can be. A single drilling mistake turned into a decades-long inferno that nobody originally intended. So, yeah, it's not literally a gate to hell, but standing at the edge of a constantly burning crater in the middle of nowhere definitely hits that same primal fear button. Story 6. Catatumbo lightning is one of those natural phenomena that feels straight up apocalyptic when you first learn about it, because it's not just a storm. It's basically a permanent lightning factory in one specific spot on Earth. This happens over Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela, where for a huge part of the year, the sky just goes insane. We're talking 140 to 160 nights a year, storms lasting up to 9 to 10 hours, with lightning flashing sometimes 20 to 40 times per minute. So imagine standing there at night and the sky literally never goes dark. It's just constant flashing, like someone is taking photos of the entire horizon non-stop. The terrifying part isn't just the frequency, it's the scale. This place has the highest concentration of lightning on Earth, around 250 strikes per square kilometer per year. It's so intense that historically, sailors used it as a natural lighthouse because you could see the flashes from miles away. What causes it is this perfect storm setup where warm, humid air from the lake rises and collides with cooler air coming down from the surrounding Andes Mountains, constantly recharging storm clouds in the exact same place. So instead of a storm passing through like normal, it just keeps regenerating itself over and over again. And the really eerie part is that a lot of the lightning is silent from a distance. So you just see the sky flickering endlessly without the constant thunder you'd expect. It looks less like weather and more like the sky glitching. It's one of those phenomena that makes you realize nature doesn't just have storms. It has locations where the atmosphere basically breaks into a loop and never really turns off. Story 7, the red crab migration on Christmas Island, is one of those natural events that looks almost apocalyptic if you see it in person, because it's not just a few animals moving, it's millions of them all at once. We're talking about the Christmas Island red crab, and every year, usually triggered by the first heavy rains, they all decide at basically the same time that it's time to head to the ocean to reproduce. And when they go, they go. The entire forest floor starts moving. Roads turn red. Sidewalks disappear. Cars literally have to stop because the ground is just covered in crabs crawling in one direction, like some kind of living tide. It's not chaotic either, which somehow makes it creepier. It's like this coordinated, unstoppable migration wave. People who've seen it describe it as the landscape coming alive in a way that feels wrong, like you're watching something that shouldn't exist outside of a movie. The terrifying part isn't that the crabs are dangerous. They're harmless. It's the sheer scale and inevitability of it. You can't stop it. You can't redirect it. And for a while, the island basically belongs to them. Humans just adapt around it, building crab bridges and closing roads because there's no fighting millions of synchronized animals. Then, after reaching the coast, they spawn, release their eggs into the ocean, and eventually the next generation makes its way back inland, restarting the cycle. It's one of those reminders that nature can operate on a scale that makes human systems feel irrelevant, Like, for a brief period every year, the island flips ownership and becomes part of a biological machine that's been running long before people showed up. It's not violent, but it definitely hits that uncanny, this is too much life moving at once feeling. Story 8. The Great Blue Hole looks almost fake from above, like someone punched a perfect dark circle into the ocean. But the unsettling part isn't the shape, it's what's going on underneath. From the surface, it's just this deep navy blue void surrounded by bright turquoise reef, which already feels wrong visually, like a hole in reality. But once you go down, it gets way more disturbing. It's about 125 meters deep, and as you descend, the environment changes fast. Light fades, colors disappear, and then you hit layers of water where oxygen drops off significantly. Go deep enough, and it becomes a low oxygen, almost lifeless zone where very little can survive. Then there are the cave structures. This thing used to be a dry limestone cave system during the last ice age, before sea levels rose and flooded it. So inside, you've got massive stalactites, like the kind you'd expect in a cave, except they're now underwater at insane depths. That alone is creepy because your brain knows those formations shouldn't be there unless this whole place used to be something else. Deeper still, divers have found layers of hydrogen sulfide, which creates a cloudy, toxic boundary that looks like an underwater fog. Cross into it, and visibility drops hard, and below that layer, it's basically a dead zone. No oxygen, no light, no real life. What makes it terrifying isn't that it's actively trying to kill you, it's that it feels like a vertical portal into a different version of Earth, one that's dark, ancient, and completely indifferent to anything human. It's the ocean equivalent of looking down into something that shouldn't have a bottom. Story 9. The nearly never-ending storm people usually bring up is the Great Red Spot on Jupiter. This isn't just a storm like a hurricane on Earth. It's a massive, swirling vortex that's been raging for at least 300 to 400 years, and possibly much longer. When astronomers first observed it in the 1600s, it was already there, which means this thing has been spinning non-stop since before electricity, before industrialization, before basically modern history even began. And the scale is ridiculous. At its largest, the Great Red Spot was big enough to swallow multiple Earths. Even today, after shrinking over time, it's still larger than our entire planet. Winds inside it can reach 400 to 600 kilometers per hour, and because Jupiter is a gas giant with no solid surface, there's nothing to slow it down the way landmasses weaken hurricanes on Earth, so it just keeps going. What makes it especially eerie is that it exists in a completely alien environment. No ground, no familiar atmosphere, just layers of gas, pressure, and chemistry interacting in ways we don't fully understand. The red color itself is still debated, possibly caused by complex chemical reactions involving sunlight and atmospheric compounds. And the fact that it's been slowly shrinking adds another layer of tension, like you're watching a centuries-old storm gradually change in ways we can't predict. It's basically a permanent scar in a planet's atmosphere, a storm that never really ends, in a world where storms don't have to follow the rules we're used to. It's not terrifying in a runaway sense, but more in that deep cosmic way where you realize nature doesn't just do extreme things, it can do them indefinitely. Story 10. Volcanic lightning is one of those things that looks like the Earth is straight up breaking its own rules, because you've got a volcano already erupting, lava, ash, fire, and then on top of that, the sky starts throwing lightning bolts through the plume like it's a thunderstorm from hell. It happens during explosive eruptions when massive amounts of ash, rock fragments, and gas get blasted into the atmosphere. Inside that ash cloud, particles are constantly colliding, rubbing, and breaking apart, which builds up static electrical charges, kind of like a giant violent version of rubbing a balloon on your hair. Eventually, the charge difference becomes so strong that it discharges as lightning. So now you've got this towering ash column, pitch black, filled with debris, and suddenly it lights up with bright, jagged flashes cutting through it. Sometimes it's small flickers, other times it's full-on lightning bolts ripping through the eruption column. The terrifying part is how chaotic and layered it is. A normal thunderstorm is already intense, but volcanic lightning stacks multiple hazards at once. Extreme heat, toxic gases, falling ash, pyroclastic flows, and now unpredictable electrical discharges. It's like nature combining different disasters into one event just to flex. And visually, it's insane. Imagine a dark sky, a volcano erupting, ash clouds boiling upward, and lightning flashing inside it over and over again. It doesn't look natural in the way rainstorms do. It looks like something is tearing open the atmosphere. It's one of those rare moments where Earth feels less like a stable planet and more like a system that can glitch into something almost apocalyptic. Story 11, fire rainbows are one of those things that look completely unreal, like the sky decided to turn into a glowing painting for a few minutes. But the name is actually misleading because there's no fire, and it's not really a rainbow in the usual sense. What people are seeing is called a circumhorizontal arc, a rare optical phenomenon that happens when sunlight passes through ice crystals in high-altitude clouds. These clouds, usually cirrus, contain tiny, flat, hexagonal ice plates that act like millions of little prisms floating in the sky. For it to happen, everything has to line up perfectly. The sun has to be high in the sky, typically more than 58 degrees above the horizon, and the ice crystals have to be oriented just right so that light enters one side of the crystal and exits another at a precise angle. When that happens, the light gets split into its component colors, creating those vivid horizontal bands that look like someone spilled neon paint across the clouds. That's why they're rare. It's not just sun plus clouds, it's a very specific setup. The terrifying, or at least unsettling part, isn't that it's dangerous, because it's completely harmless. It's more that it looks wrong in a way your brain isn't used to. Unlike a normal rainbow, which has a familiar arc shape tied to rain, these appear as bright streaks or patches of color in unexpected places, sometimes cutting across the sky in a way that feels almost artificial. People who see them for the first time often think something is off, like the sky is glitching or reflecting something it shouldn't. It's a good reminder that even something as familiar as sunlight can produce effects that look completely alien when the conditions are just right. Basically, it's the atmosphere accidentally creating one of the most surreal visuals you'll ever see, and doing it with nothing but ice and light. Story 12. The ice forests in the Andes Mountains are one of those natural phenomena that feel like you've accidentally stepped onto another planet, because instead of normal snow or ice, you get these tall, thin blades of ice sticking straight up out of the ground like frozen spikes. They're called penitentes, and they can grow from a few centimeters to several meters tall, forming entire fields that look like a forest made of ice knives. The way they form is honestly kind of eerie. At those high altitudes, the air is extremely dry, and the sunlight is brutally intense. Instead of melting normally, the ice undergoes sublimation, meaning it turns directly from solid ice into vapor without becoming liquid first. But it doesn't happen evenly. Tiny dips in the surface trap more sunlight, which makes them sublimate faster, deepening the gaps, while the peaks stay intact longer. Over time, this feedback loop exaggerates everything. Small bumps turn into spikes. Small dips turn into deep channels. And eventually you get these sharp, closely packed ice formations, all pointing toward the sun. Walking through them would be a nightmare. They're uneven, sharp, reflective, and disorienting. And at high altitudes where oxygen is already low, navigating through what basically looks like a frozen blade maze is not something you'd want to deal with for long. What makes it feel unsettling is how structured it looks. It's not random ice. It's organized, directional, almost intentional looking, like the environment itself decided to grow something. It's one of those places where nature doesn't just look harsh. It looks alien in a way that makes you feel like you're not supposed to be there. Story 13. Supercells are basically the final boss version of thunderstorms. The kind of storms that don't just pass through, but organize themselves into something way more structured and long-lived than normal weather. Inside a supercell, you get a rotating updraft called a mesocyclone, which is what sets it apart from regular storms. Instead of chaotic rising air that collapses quickly, the airflow becomes organized and starts spinning, which lets the storm sustain itself for hours while continuously pulling in warm, moist air and throwing out rain, hail, and wind. That rotation is what makes them so dangerous. Supercells are responsible for most of the strongest tornadoes on Earth, along with massive hailstones that can get to baseball or even softball size, extreme lightning, flash flooding, and violent straight-line winds. It's basically one system producing multiple forms of destruction at once. What's unsettling is how they look. A fully developed supercell often has this huge layered structure with a dark, lowering base and a rotating wall cloud underneath. The sky can turn this strange greenish color from the way light interacts with dense water and ice particles. Everything goes quiet, the air feels heavy, and you get that eerie calm right before things escalate. And then there's the scale. These storms can stretch for tens of kilometers, towering high into the atmosphere, with internal dynamics that are still being studied. Even though meteorology has advanced a lot, predicting exactly when and where a supercell will drop a tornado is still incredibly difficult. It's one of those phenomena that reminds you the atmosphere isn't just a weather. It's a massive fluid system capable of organizing itself into something that feels almost alive. A rotating storm that feeds itself, grows, and sometimes decides to tear the ground apart. Story 14. Waterspouts are one of those things that look almost elegant from a distance, like the ocean is calmly reaching up and touching the sky. But once you understand what you're actually looking at, they become a lot more unsettling. A waterspout is basically a rotating column of air and water mist that forms over water, kind of like a tornado, but usually weaker and formed under different conditions. There are a couple types, but the most common ones, called fair-weather waterspouts, can form under relatively calm-looking skies, which is part of what makes them creepy. You'll see this thin funnel drop down from a cloud, or sometimes appear to rise from the surface, connecting sea and sky in a spinning tube. Around the base, water gets pulled up into a swirling spray ring, which gives the illusion that the ocean itself is being sucked upward. And sometimes there's not much warning. Unlike the massive supercell storms we talked about earlier, waterspouts can develop quickly in warm, humid conditions, especially in tropical or subtropical areas. One minute it's just the ocean, the next minute there's a rotating column forming in front of you. The terrifying part is how deceptive they are. They can look relatively harmless, almost like a visual effect, but they still involve strong winds and rotation. Small boats can be flipped or damaged, and if one moves on shore, it can behave more like a weak tornado. Also, the way they move is unsettling. They can drift, stall, or suddenly change direction depending on wind patterns, which makes them unpredictable if you're nearby. Visually, though, they're insane. A narrow spinning funnel, water spiraling upward, clouds above feeding into it. It looks less like weather and more like some kind of connection between two different worlds. It's one of those phenomena where nature accidentally creates something that feels almost too symmetrical and deliberate to be random. Story 15. The door to hell is what people often call Darvaza gas crater, and it's one of those places that genuinely looks like the earth opened up and decided to stay that way. Out in the middle of the Karakum Desert, there's this massive crater that's been on fire for decades. It started in 1971 when Soviet geologists were drilling for gas and accidentally collapsed the ground into an underground pocket filled with natural gas. To avoid the gas spreading, they set it on fire, thinking it would burn off in a few days. It never did. Instead, it just kept burning and burning and burning. At night, it's especially disturbing. The entire crater glows orange, with hundreds of individual flames flickering inside like a giant furnace. You can hear the gas hissing, feel the heat from the edge, and see the fire moving constantly like it's alive. It's not just a static fire either. The flames shift, flare up, die down in spots, and then reignite elsewhere, depending on how the gas escapes below. It gives the whole thing this chaotic, almost breathing quality. What makes it terrifying isn't just the fire, it's the fact that it wasn't meant to exist. It's a human-made accident that tapped into something underground and created a phenomenon that nobody can easily turn off. It's like a wound in the earth that just refuses to close. And the idea that something beneath the surface can fuel a fire for decades without stopping hits a very primal fear. Like there's something vast and uncontrollable below us that we only barely understand. So, yeah, not literally a gateway to hell, but if you walked up to it in the dark without context, you probably wouldn't argue with the name. Story 16, sinkholes. They usually form when water slowly dissolves underground rock like limestone, creating hidden cavities beneath the surface. Over time, the layer above gets thinner and weaker until one day it just gives way. No warning, no buildup you can see, just the ground collapsing into a hole that wasn't there seconds ago. And that's what makes them terrifying. It's not like a storm you can watch coming or an earthquake you might feel building. A sinkhole can open under a road, a house, a parking lot, or even while someone is standing there. One moment, everything is normal. The next, there's a crater swallowing whatever was above it. Some are small, but others are massive. Entire buildings, cars, and sections of streets have disappeared into them. And once something falls in, it's often gone for good, because these holes can connect to deep underground systems filled with unstable debris, water, and collapsing rock. What adds to the fear is that they can keep growing. The initial collapse might just be the beginning, and the edges can continue crumbling inward, making the hole wider over time. That means even being near one can be dangerous. There's also something psychologically unsettling about it. We're used to thinking of the ground as solid, permanent, safe. Sinkholes break that assumption completely. They remind you that under your feet, in some places, there might be nothing but empty space waiting for the wrong moment. It's not flashy like volcanic lightning or endless storms, but in a different way, it's worse. Because it doesn't look dangerous until it already is. Story 17. The Danakil Depression is one of the closest things on Earth to what people imagine another planet looks like. And the terrifying part is that it's not just visually alien, it's actively hostile to life in multiple ways at the same time. This place sits below sea level in the Afar region, and it's one of the hottest inhabited places on the planet, with average temperatures that can push well above 40 degrees Celsius for long periods. But heat alone isn't what makes it disturbing. It's everything layered on top of it. You've got active volcanic activity from areas like Dalol, where the ground bubbles with acidic hot springs, neon-colored mineral pools, and constantly shifting crusts that look solid but can collapse under your weight. The colors, bright yellows, greens, oranges, come from sulfur, iron, and other minerals. But instead of looking natural, it looks toxic, like the landscape itself is chemically wrong. Then there are the gases. Toxic fumes like sulfur dioxide and other volcanic gases seep out of the allard, creating air that can be dangerous to breathe in certain spots. Combine that with extreme heat and dehydration risk, and it becomes a place where your body is constantly under stress, just existing there. There are also vast salt flats stretching across the region, cracked and blindingly reflective under the sun, adding to that endless, empty, nowhere to hide feeling. What makes it especially unsettling is that it doesn't just have one hazard, it stacks them. Heat, Kislotinist, toxic gas, unstable ground, volcanic activity, all in one place. And yet, incredibly, people still live and work around the edges of it, mining salt and crossing the terrain, which somehow makes it even more surreal. It's not just dangerous, it feels fundamentally incompatible with human life. Like you're walking through a part of Earth that never got the memo that it was supposed to be livable. Story 18. Jacob's Well looks calm, clear, and almost inviting from the surface. At the top, it's just this perfectly circular opening in the ground filled with crystal clear water, like a natural swimming hole. People jump in, swim around, and it doesn't look dangerous at all. But that opening is actually the entrance to a deep underwater cave system that drops down and then branches into a series of tight, twisting chambers. And that's where things go wrong. Divers who go down into it don't just descend into open space. They enter narrow passages where visibility can drop fast, silt can get kicked up, and one wrong move can turn clear water into total darkness in seconds. Some sections require squeezing through tight gaps, and once you're in, turning around isn't always easy. There are multiple chambers inside, and each one gets progressively more dangerous. Some areas have trapped debris, others have unstable silt, and deeper sections can disorient even experienced divers. What makes it especially terrifying is how deceptive it is. From above, it looks like a peaceful natural spring. Underneath, it's a confined, complex cave system that has claimed multiple lives over the years. It's considered one of the most dangerous dive sites in Texas, not because it's aggressive, but because it's unforgiving. There's no current dragging you down, no dramatic visual warning. It's just depth, darkness, and tight space waiting below something that looks completely harmless. It's basically a reminder that not everything dangerous announces itself. Sometimes it just looks like a perfect blue circle in the ground. Story 19. The Death Zone on Mount Everest is one of the most brutally unforgiving environments humans willingly walk into. And what makes it terrifying isn't something dramatic like fire or storms. It's the fact that your own body starts shutting down just by being there. This zone begins at around 8,000 meters above sea level, where the oxygen level is so low that the human body can't properly acclimatize anymore. Even at rest, you're slowly suffocating. Every step feels like extreme exhaustion. Your brain gets less oxygen, decision-making gets worse, and simple tasks become dangerously difficult. It's not like flipping a switch either. It's a gradual decline. Climbers can develop high-altitude cerebral edema or high-altitude pulmonary edema, both of which can become fatal quickly. Symptoms include confusion, loss of coordination, hallucinations, and the inability to think clearly, which is terrifying when you're already in a place where one mistake can mean falling thousands of meters. And the environment doesn't help. Temperatures can drop to extreme lows, winds can become violent, and storms can roll in fast. Your body is burning energy just to stay alive, but digestion and recovery barely function, so you're running on a constant deficit. What really hits people is the presence of bodies. Because it's so dangerous to retrieve them, many climbers who die up there remain on the mountain, sometimes even becoming landmarks along the route. You're literally climbing past people who didn't make it, while knowing you're in the same conditions that killed them. The death zone isn't a sudden event. It's a place where survival itself is temporary. You're not meant to stay there, and the longer you do, the more the odds turn against you. It's basically the edge of what the human body can tolerate, where nature doesn't attack you directly, it just lets your systems fail. Story 20, Racetrack Playa. Out in Death Valley is one of those places that messes with your brain because nothing dramatic is happening, and yet something clearly is. You've got this massive, flat, cracked desert floor, completely still, completely silent. And then scattered across it are rocks with long trails behind them, like they've just casually slid across the ground on their own. No footprints, no drag marks from animals, no obvious force, just rocks that moved. For decades, nobody could fully explain it, which is why it built this almost supernatural reputation. People would visit, take photos, come back later, and the rocks would be in different places with fresh trails. It genuinely looked like something invisible was pushing them around. And the creepiest part? Nobody actually saw it happen for a long time. The real explanation, once scientists finally caught it on camera, is still kind of eerie in its own way. Under very specific conditions, a thin layer of water forms on the playa after rain, then freezes overnight. In the morning, the ice breaks into large sheets, and light winds push those sheets slowly across the slick mud. If a rock is embedded in the ice, it gets dragged along. The movement is incredibly slow, like centimeters per second, so unless you're standing there at the exact right time, you'll never notice it happening. You just see the before and after. So, for years, these rocks were quietly moving across a dead, silent landscape with no witnesses. That's what makes it unsettling. Not that it's dangerous, but that it feels like the environment is doing something behind your back. A place where the ground looks completely still, but isn't. Story 21, the Bhola Cyclone. It formed over the Bay of Bengal and intensified into a powerful cyclone. But storms like that weren't unheard of in the region. What made this one catastrophic was where it hit and how vulnerable the area was. When it made landfall, it didn't just bring wind. It brought a massive storm surge that rolled over the low-lying coastal regions of what is now Bangladesh. Entire villages sat barely above sea level, and when that wall of water came in, there was nowhere to go. It flooded huge areas almost instantly, sweeping away homes, livestock, and infrastructure, everything. And it happened at night. People were asleep with little warning, and by the time the water arrived, escape was nearly impossible. The combination of darkness, flooding, and lack of evacuation systems turned it into a worst-case scenario. The scale is what makes it truly horrifying. Estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of people died, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. Entire communities were wiped out so completely that recovery wasn't just about rebuilding. It was about trying to account for what was even there before. What makes it even more unsettling is how quiet it was compared to modern disasters. There were no real-time alerts, no widespread communication systems, no rapid international response. It just happened, and the aftermath unfolded slowly as the world realized the scale of what had occurred. It's a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying natural phenomena aren't the ones that look the most dramatic. They're the ones that combine power, timing, and vulnerability in the worst possible way. A storm that didn't just hit, it was erased. Story 22, the 1976 Tangshan earthquake, is one of those disasters that's terrifying not just because of the force of nature, but because of how sudden and absolute it was. It struck in the early hours of the morning, around 3:40 a.m., when most people were asleep. There was almost no warning. One moment, everything was normal. The next, the ground violently tore itself apart beneath an entire city. Tangshan was heavily industrial and densely populated, with a lot of buildings not designed to withstand a major earthquake. When the shaking started, structures didn't just crack, they collapsed. Whole neighborhoods were flattened in seconds. Roads split, railways twisted, and infrastructure just stopped existing. What makes it especially horrifying is how fast it happened. This wasn't a slow buildup or something people could react to. It was over in under a minute, but in that time, massive destruction had already occurred. Survivors described being thrown from beds, buried in debris, or trapped in total darkness almost instantly. Then came the aftermath. The emergency response was extremely difficult. Communication lines were down, transportation was disrupted, and the scale of destruction made coordination nearly impossible at first. People were trapped under rubble for hours or days, and rescuers had to work with limited equipment. The death toll is still debated, but it's widely considered to be in the hundreds of thousands, making it one of the deadliest earthquakes ever recorded. What really makes it unsettling is the randomness of it. No storm clouds, no visible warning signs, nothing you could point to and say, "This is coming." Just a quiet city in the middle of the night, and then total destruction out of nowhere. It's the kind of event that reminds you the ground beneath your feet isn't as stable as it feels, and when it moves, there's often nothing you can do about it. Story 23, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, is one of the most terrifying natural disasters ever recorded, not just because of its scale, but because of how deceptively it began. It started with a massive undersea earthquake off the coast of Sumatra, one of the most powerful ever recorded. But what people along the coast experienced didn't immediately feel like the end of the world. In many places, the ocean actually pulled back first. The shoreline suddenly retreated, exposing the seabed, fish flopping around, reefs and rocks that are normally hidden. People walked out to look, confused, curious, taking photos, not realizing they were witnessing the ocean preparing to come back with unimaginable force. Then it did. A series of enormous waves raced across the ocean at jetliner speeds, hitting coastlines across Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, and even parts of Africa. When they reached land, they didn't always look like towering movie-style waves. Sometimes it was more like a rapidly rising wall of water, or a powerful surge that just kept coming, pushing inland and not stopping. Entire towns were overwhelmed in minutes. Buildings were ripped apart, cars carried away like toys, and people had almost no time to react. In many areas, there was no tsunami warning system in place, so the first sign of danger was the water already arriving. The scale is what makes it so haunting. Over 200,000 people lost their lives across multiple countries in a disaster that unfolded over hours but felt instantaneous to those caught in it. What really sticks with people is that moment before impact, the quiet, the retreating sea, the confusion. It's the idea that something can look calm, even fascinating, right before it becomes catastrophic. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous things don't look like danger until it's already too late. Story 24. The 2010 Haiti earthquake is one of those disasters that shows how terrifying nature becomes when it collides with vulnerability. On paper, a magnitude 7.0 earthquake is powerful, but not the largest ever recorded. The horror came from where and how it struck. The epicenter was extremely close to the capital, Port-au-Prince, and the quake was shallow, which means the energy hit the surface with brutal intensity. And it hit fast. There was no real warning. Buildings began shaking violently, and within seconds, many structures, especially poorly reinforced ones, collapsed. Homes, schools, hospitals, government buildings, entire sections of the city just folded in on themselves. What makes it especially disturbing is how quickly everything turned from normal life into total chaos. People were trapped under rubble almost instantly. Streets filled with debris. Communication networks failed. Hospitals that were supposed to treat the injured were themselves destroyed or overwhelmed. Survivors were left searching for loved ones in dust-filled silence, broken only by cries for help. The scale of loss was enormous. Hundreds of thousands of people died, and millions were affected. But beyond the numbers, it's the human side that hits hardest. Families buried together, entire neighborhoods gone, and a country already struggling pushed into an even deeper crisis. Then came the aftermath. Rescue efforts were incredibly difficult. Limited infrastructure, damaged roads, and lack of resources slowed response times. People went days without adequate medical care, clean water, or shelter. And even after the immediate disaster, disease, displacement, and instability followed. What makes it terrifying isn't just the earthquake itself, it's how fragile things can be when systems aren't built to withstand that kind of shock. It's a reminder that nature doesn't need to be the biggest or strongest event to be devastating. It just needs the wrong place at the wrong time with nothing to absorb the impact. Story 25. That feeling that the microbes are gaining on us isn't just paranoia. It's rooted in a real biological arms race that never stops. For most of human history, microbes had the upper hand. Diseases wiped out huge portions of populations, and something as simple as a cut or infection could be fatal. Then antibiotics and vaccines flipped the script. Suddenly, infections that used to kill became treatable, and diseases like smallpox were wiped out entirely. But here's the problem. Microbes evolve fast. Bacteria can reproduce in minutes, not years. That means random mutations happen constantly, and when you introduce antibiotics, you're applying intense selective pressure. The bacteria that survive, by chance, are the ones with resistance traits, and they multiply. Over time, entire populations can become harder to kill. That's how you end up with things like antibiotic resistance, where drugs that used to work just don't anymore. And it's not just about evolution in a slow sense. Bacteria can actually share resistance genes with each other, even across different species. which makes the whole process faster and more chaotic. Viruses play their own game too. Some mutate quickly, which is why vaccines sometimes need updates, and why outbreaks can still happen even when we understand the pathogen pretty well. The scary part isn't that we're helpless. We're not. Medicine is still incredibly powerful, but the advantage isn't permanent. We rely on developing new drugs, using antibiotics responsibly, improving surveillance, and understanding how these organisms adapt. If overused or misused, our tools lose effectiveness faster than we can replace them. So it's less we're losing and more we're in a constant race. And the unsettling truth is that microbes don't need to outsmart us. They just need to keep evolving, which is something they've been doing successfully for billions of years. Story 26. The idea of extinction feels obvious now, but historically, it was actually hard for people to accept that entire species could just disappear forever. Back then, when people found massive fossils, the default assumption wasn't this animal is gone, it was we just haven't found it yet. That's why Thomas Jefferson looked at mastodon fossils and figured they must still be roaming somewhere unexplored. When he sent Lewis and Clark west, he literally told them to keep an eye out. The idea that nature could permanently lose species took time to sink in. Now we know it's happened multiple times on a massive scale. There have been at least 5 major mass extinctions in Earth's history, where huge percentages of life were wiped out relatively quickly in geological terms. Things like asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, and extreme climate shifts disrupted ecosystems so badly that entire branches of life vanished. The most famous is the one that took out the non-avian dinosaurs, but others were even more severe, wiping out the majority of marine life. What's unsettling is that many scientists think we're living through another one now, often called the 6th mass extinction. But unlike past events, this one isn't being driven by a single asteroid or eruption. It's largely tied to human activity, habitat destruction, climate change, pollution, overfishing, and the spread of invasive species. The scary part is how quiet it is. There's no single dramatic moment where everything collapses. It's gradual, uneven, and easy to ignore day to day. Species disappear, ecosystems degrade, and the overall system shifts without most people noticing in real time. It's basically extinction happening in slow motion. And the uncomfortable twist is that, for the first time, the cause isn't some external cosmic event. It's a species that's aware of what's happening and still figuring out how to respond. Story 27. Flammable ice bubbles. They're most famously seen in frozen lakes like Abraham Lake, where you'll find these perfectly stacked white bubbles trapped under clear ice, sometimes layered like a frozen explosion. At first glance, it just looks cool, but those bubbles are methane gas. As plants and organic material decay at the bottom of the lake, they release methane. Normally, that gas would just rise and escape into the atmosphere, but in winter, the surface freezes over. As methane rises, it gets trapped under the ice, forming these visible pockets. Then more gas rises and freezes again, stacking bubbles on top of bubbles, so you end up with these frozen columns of gas just sitting there. The flammable part comes in when the ice melts, or if someone breaks through and releases the gas. Methane is highly flammable, so if it's ignited, it can actually catch fire. There are videos of people popping the bubbles and lighting them, and it literally burns like a small gas leak, which is where it gets a bit eerie. You're standing on what looks like a solid frozen lake, but beneath your feet are trapped pockets of invisible combustible gas. It's silent, it's stable, until it isn't. It's not some constant explosive hazard or anything, but it does create that weird feeling that the environment is holding on to something volatile just below the surface. Basically, it's nature casually storing fuel under a sheet of ice and making it look beautiful at the same time. Story 28. Ocean black holes sound like sci-fi, but people are usually talking about massive rotating water systems called eddies. Basically, giant whirlpools in the open ocean that can trap and move water in eerie ways. One famous example is Agulhas rings, which break off from currents near southern Africa and drift across the ocean like spinning disks of water. These things can be hundreds of kilometers wide, so from above, they're not dramatic spirals like in movies. They look almost calm, just a slow, massive rotation. The black hole nickname comes from how they behave. Water, heat, salt, nutrients, and even marine life can get pulled into these rotating systems and carried long distances while staying trapped inside. Scientists sometimes compare them to black holes because, mathematically, they can act like boundaries where stuff enters but doesn't easily leave. But the scary part isn't that they're going to suck ships down. That's not how they work. It's more subtle. You've got enormous, invisible structures in the ocean, moving slowly, quietly, influencing ecosystems, redistributing heat across the planet, and carrying entire pockets of water like sealed containers drifting through a much larger system. If you were on a boat, you might not even realize you're inside one. And that's what makes it unsettling. It's not violent or obvious. It's just this hidden layer of motion beneath the surface, shaping the ocean in ways you can't see. So they're not literal black holes, but they do share that eerie idea of invisible boundaries and trapped movement. Huge, slow, and quietly powerful systems operating right under our feet. Story 29. Imagine you're under the Antarctic ice, everything already cold and silent, and then something starts growing downward from the ice above you, like a frozen stalactite reaching for the seafloor. That's a Brinicle. A Brinicle forms when extremely cold, super salty water, called brine, gets pushed out of forming sea ice. As seawater freezes, it forces salt out, creating this dense, freezing liquid that's much colder than the surrounding ocean. That brine sinks because it's heavier, and as it flows downward, it freezes the seawater around it. So instead of ice forming from the surface outward, you get this hollow tube of ice growing downward through the water, slowly, quietly, like something alive. When it finally reaches the seafloor, it doesn't stop. The brine keeps flowing out, spreading along the bottom, and anything in its path, sea stars, urchins, small marine life, gets flash frozen where it sits. There's footage of animals trying to move away, but the freezing front just keeps advancing, encasing them in ice. That's why they call them icy fingers of death. What makes it especially unsettling is how unnatural it looks. Ice is supposed to float or sit still, not grow downward like a crystal spear from the ceiling of the ocean. And the movement is so slow you almost don't notice it happening until it's too late. It's not violent, it's not explosive. It's just this creeping, silent freeze spreading across the sea floor. One of those moments where nature doesn't feel chaotic, it feels deliberate. Story 30. Rogue waves are one of the most terrifying things the ocean can do, because they completely ignore what people used to think waves were supposed to behave like. For a long time, sailors talked about massive walls of water appearing out of nowhere, sometimes 2 or 3 times bigger than surrounding waves. And for years, people thought those stories were exaggerated or just sea myths. Then instruments and satellites confirmed they're very real. A rogue wave isn't just a big wave in a storm. It's a sudden, steep, towering wave that can rise out of relatively normal conditions, often reaching heights of 20 to 30 meters or more. And the worst part is how quickly it happens. There's no gradual buildup you can prepare for. One moment you're dealing with rough but manageable seas. The next, there's a massive wall of water in front of you. Ships have been damaged or even sunk by them. One well-documented example is the Dropner wave, which was measured at about 25 meters and helped prove these waves weren't just stories. What makes rogue waves so dangerous is their shape and force. They're often much steeper and more powerful than normal waves, meaning they hit with a sudden, concentrated impact. It's not a rolling swell. It's like the ocean throwing a vertical wall at you, and they don't follow predictable patterns. They can form from the interaction of multiple wave systems, currents, and wind conditions aligning just right, focusing energy into a single, massive peak. But even with modern ocean science, predicting exactly when and where one will form is still extremely difficult. The unsettling part is the randomness. The ocean can look rough but survivable, and then suddenly produce something far beyond what you were dealing with seconds before. It's the idea that out there, in the middle of nothing, the sea can just decide to create a wave that doesn't fit the rules, and there's nothing you can do about it when it happens. Story 31. Fire whirls are one of those things that look like nature accidentally summoned something it shouldn't have. They're basically tornadoes made of fire, and they form when intense heat from a wildfire or large blaze causes air to rise rapidly while surrounding winds start to rotate. If everything lines up just right, that rising, spinning column tightens and pulls flames, ash, and burning debris into a vertical vortex. So instead of a normal fire spreading outward, you get a spinning pillar of flame reaching into the sky. Some are small and short-lived, but others can become massive and terrifyingly powerful. In extreme cases, they've been known to reach hundreds of meters high, generate their own wind systems, and even uproot trees or fling burning debris over large distances, spreading new fires as they move. That's what makes them so dangerous. It's not just fire anymore. It's a moving, rotating system that can change direction unpredictably. Firefighters can't treat it like a normal fire front because it behaves more like a living thing, shifting, accelerating, and intensifying on its own. And visually, it's honestly disturbing. You'll see this twisting column, glowing orange and red, filled with embers spiraling upward, sometimes making a roaring sound like a jet engine. It doesn't look like something that should exist in nature, more like a glitch where fire and weather merged into one phenomenon. In rare extreme events, like during massive wildfires, these can even evolve into what scientists call fire tornadoes, which are larger, longer lasting, and even more destructive. It's basically the atmosphere and a fire feeding off each other until they create something that feels way too organized and violent to be random. A spinning pillar of flame that moves on its own is about as close as nature gets to looking intentionally hostile. Story 32. Bioluminescent waves and caves are one of those things that look beautiful at first, and then start to feel a little unsettling the longer you think about them. Out in places like Mosquito Bay, the ocean can literally glow when it moves. Every step, every splash, every wave lights up electric blue, like the water is charged with energy. It's caused by microscopic organisms called dinoflagellates that emit light when disturbed, basically as a defense mechanism. So when a wave crashes, it flashes. When a fish swims, it leaves a glowing trail. When you touch the water, your hands light up. At first it feels magical, but then it hits you. You're surrounded by millions of living organisms reacting to movement in real time. The entire ocean surface becomes this responsive, glowing system. And suddenly it doesn't feel passive anymore. Then there are caves. In places like Waitomo, glowworm caves, the ceiling lights up with thousands of tiny blue points, like a night sky underground. Except those stars are actually living larvae producing light to lure prey. You're not looking at stars, you're looking at organisms hunting. The glow draws insects in, and then sticky threads drop down to trap them. So, the peaceful, beautiful cave ceiling is actually a giant biological trap. That's what makes both of these phenomena slightly eerie. They're not just glowing for no reason. There's always a biological purpose behind it: defense, attraction, predation. And once you realize that, the beauty takes on a different tone. It's not just nature being pretty, it's nature using light as a tool, and you're standing right in the middle of it. Story 33, out in the deserts of Namib Desert. You get these perfectly round, evenly spaced bare patches of lard, surrounded by grass, stretching for kilometers like someone carefully stamped circles across the landscape. They're called fairy circles, and for a long time, nobody had a solid explanation for them, which is why they picked up all kinds of myths, from spirits living underground to toxic gases or weird radiation. What makes them creepy isn't just that they exist, it's how precise they are. Each circle is almost perfectly shaped, with clear boundaries, and they tend to be spaced in this oddly regular pattern, like the desert organized itself. It doesn't look random at all, which is what throws people off. Nature usually looks messy. This looks designed. Scientists have spent years trying to figure them out, and the current thinking is that they're likely caused by a mix of factors, mainly competition for water in an extremely dry environment, possibly combined with the activity of termites. The idea is that plants compete for limited moisture, and in doing so, they create self-organizing patterns where some areas stay bare while others grow, maximizing survival across the system. Termites may also play a role by altering soil structure and water retention. So, instead of something supernatural, it's probably a natural pattern emerging from simple rules: water, roots, and survival interacting over time. But even knowing that doesn't fully kill the weirdness, because when you actually look at them, it still feels like the land is following a hidden blueprint. Thousands of circles, repeating across the desert, silent, untouched, and still not 100% explained in every detail. It's one of those places where nature accidentally creates something that looks intentional, and that alone is enough to make it unsettling. Story 34, the tidal bore on the Amazon River, known locally as the Pororoca, is one of those natural phenomena that feels completely wrong when you first see it, because rivers aren't supposed to flow backwards. But that's exactly what happens. When the Atlantic tide pushes inland with enough force, it collides with the river's outgoing current and creates a massive, continuous wave that travels upstream. Not a quick splash or surge, an actual rolling wall of water that can move for kilometers inland, sometimes lasting for hours. It's loud, too. People describe hearing it before they see it, like a distant roar building through the forest, getting closer and closer until the wave appears, cutting through the river and everything in it. The terrifying part is the force and persistence. This isn't a single crashing wave like on a beach. It's a sustained, moving front of water that bulldozes through the river system, tearing out trees along the banks, eroding land, and dragging debris along with it. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're not just dealing with water. You're dealing with a moving barrier that keeps coming. Surfers actually chase it, riding the wave for incredible distances, which somehow makes it even more surreal. But imagine being deep in the jungle, thinking you're near a calm river, and then hearing that sound getting louder, with no ocean in sight. And suddenly, the river itself rises up and starts charging toward you. It's one of those moments where nature flips a basic rule you thought was constant. Water is supposed to go one way, until it doesn't. Story 35. Lake Natron is one of those places that looks like something out of a nightmare painting because the water can turn this deep red or orange color, and along the shoreline you sometimes see what look like animals frozen in place like statues. At first glance, it genuinely looks like the lake turned things to stone. What's actually happening is still pretty intense. The lake is extremely alkaline, with high concentrations of sodium carbonate and other salts, pushing the pH to levels that can be comparable to ammonia. The water is also hot, especially during dry seasons, which makes it even more hostile. So, when animals, usually birds or small creatures, end up in the water, the conditions can be lethal. Their bodies don't literally turn into stone, but they can become preserved by the chemical environment, almost like natural mummification. When they wash up, they can look eerily intact, posed as if they were frozen mid-motion. That's where those haunting images come from. What makes it even stranger is that not everything avoids it. Certain organisms are actually adapted to live there. For example, lesser flamingo thrive around the lake because the harsh conditions keep most predators away, and the algae they feed on grow well in that alkaline environment. So you've got this place that looks deadly and is deadly for many species, but also acts as a safe haven for others. The terrifying part isn't just the chemistry, it's the contrast. A calm, colorful lake under the sun, hiding water that can preserve dead animals like statues and burn skin if you're not careful. It's one of those environments that feels almost designed to look beautiful while being fundamentally hostile, like nature disguising something extreme in plain sight.